Hey, this is Cracked. Welcome to my 50 PLO Zoom video review. This is from a couple of days ago. I was grinding 50 PLO just to make it a little bit easier for me to get Supernova, and to be honest, I kind of missed playing PLO since you can sit in and sit out whenever you like. It's really enjoyable after playing 12+ hour days on the weekend. So see how it goes. Sort of a loose peel on the table on the left with pretty crappy queens, but I think it's fine versus the button. Thought we flop a top set obviously on a pretty dry board, and I thought about just going for a check raise, but it's not going to be. I mean, we're blocking pretty much everything. There's not much we need to protect versus on the flop, and just think this is one of those spots in PLO where you can actually slow play for a street and try to get more value on the turn. We're even blocking the 6 for, I mean, we're blocking him having, you know, some 2 pairs and or middle set hands, so I don't think we're gonna get that much action when we check raise here. I wouldn't check raise pot even if I did check raise, but I would check raise smaller. So if we had some sort of dynamic where I did attack these boards, because they are somewhat decent to check raise as a bluff, because it is kind of hard for him to continue, I wouldn't mind putting in a check raise then. But as you see, I just haven't been playing these games that often at all. I only have 7 hands versus him, so I think a check raise will actually seem pretty strong from me here, and so I just decided to check call there. On the king of diamonds, I mean, I was probably going to go for a check raise. I could also just lead, because it's a card where he will pick up some decent equity some of the time, but I do check there. And once he checks behind, it's just confirms that he just doesn't really have much at all. He probably didn't even pick up that much equity on the turn, because it's kind of a decent card to barrel versus my check call on the flop, which will be, you know, a bunch of queen X hands. So on the deuce river, obviously going to put out a bet. I don't think he's going to value bet thin or bluff after he checks back the turn. Definitely think a small value bet is the way to go. I don't think he's going to have the hands to call a bigger value bet. On the right side, only 36 hands, but he seems to be opening pretty wide, so it's double suited hands, decently connected. I don't mind 3-betting in position. There's not much he's going to be able to do. And we do get a call on the left table. He did end up having king 10 jack jack, so top pair on the turn with an open-ended straight draw but no flush draw, so that's what he checked back, and I don't think he would have been able to call a check raise on the flop, so I think it's fine, maybe considering leading the turn, but otherwise it's okay. On the right side, again, sort of a similar spot where we hit top pair, so we block, you know, him having those sort of top set hands. We flop a medium flush, so I don't think he's gonna have a flush that often, and pretty much anything that often, since it's a pretty disconnected flop and we block, you know, top pair, top set, etc. So I don't mind checking this back both for pot control and maybe to induce a bluff, especially versus a somewhat active opponent. The 10 on the turn, again, now we have top 2 pair in addition to our medium flush, so I think when he bets, definitely just calling, no much sense in raising here at all, and we're just happy that if the river pairs, we can still, you know, boat up, or at least we have blockers to most of the boats on the full houses. So just calling the turn and planning on calling the river, honestly, versus an active opponent. When we check back the flop, he just might think that we don't have a flush that often and that he can attack it. I don't think that that would be a great read versus us, since honestly, because of the board texture on the flop, I would probably just put out a c-bet with most of my air hands. So yeah, he does decide to turn his double-suited queens into a bluff there without any diamond blockers, and we just pick up a much bigger pot than if we had just c-bet the flop. On table on the left, we flop 2-pair. Get a check call. The deuce of clubs is an interesting card. I mean, we have the queen blocker, but since we do block top 2-pair on the flop and there's no draws except the flush draw, I think he will actually have a decent number of flush draws in his flop check calling range. It's basically that and some other kings. So since no real straight draw came in on the turn, I think it's sort of a dryish board texture, especially in PLO, since you have to use both of your cards, so he can't have a flush draw now. And the 9 is a pretty good card. Now that I think about it, and when he checks the turn and river kind of fast, I don't think he's gonna have that many flush draws. When the fourth club falls on the river, I think a lot of people actually do value bet a little bit more thinly with their flushes, so he would probably bet his jack or 10, maybe even 7 high flushes now. So seems like a spot where we should check back very often, but I don't even mind putting in a small value bet here. He has no reads on me. He might think I'm just c-betting the flop, you know, with my whole range, and you know, maybe I'm making a desperate bluff on the river when it runs out like this. And he did have top and bottom pair on the turn, so I don't know, I might have gotten a call out of that hand if I bet small on the river. On the right table, I flat jacks, somewhat decent jacks versus this guy. I think it's fine, and on this flop I'm probably just gonna check fold. Definitely gonna be opening pretty wide on the button at these stakes, and you know, versus just the average pool on 50 PLO, it's not that great. And when we're over 100 BBs, I don't mind just pot opening it on the button, and pretty much from every position. If I do encounter a short stack or maybe some more aggressive opponents, I will maybe start adjusting my opening size. But seems to be working just fine in these scenarios. So we got 3-bet on the right side. It's not a great spot for us with, you know, 4 diamonds, but decently connected hand. Think we over 100 BBs, we can definitely you know, defend and play in position. We are going to be able to take some pots away from him, and our hand flops decently well, or plays decently well post flop. So this is an interesting board, since he shouldn't actually have that many 5/7s in his range. I mean, we're gonna have much more than him, so it's also interesting when he bets this big. It just seems like a bet designed for us to fold more than anything else. So I'm pretty sure I thought about raising here, just as a, you know, we hit this board more often, you have a range advantage, and we even block top set and have some backdoor equity. But my only problem with that is we're a little bit too short. Like, we have to raise, put in 1/3 of our stack if we make a small raise. And so the other option is always just to call in position. There's a bunch of turn cards. We're probably again going to take the pot away, and we can even improve since we do have one pair now to two pair. But yeah, on a deuce, on a 5, on a 7, we're probably going to be able to take the pot away from him. And if I did have 5-7, you know, sometimes I'm just going to flat as well on the flop instead of raising, since it is rainbow. So he does check the turn, which, you know, just gives me a pretty decent spot to start bluffing. He shouldn't hit the 9 that often either, and I could definitely have two pair or a straight by now. So I just decided to bet somewhat biggish on the turn, and he just folds. Decent double suited hand. I think actually I would rather 3-bet than flat here. Being specifically small blind versus button, I do want to have some 3-betting hands that hit the sort of lower to medium board textures, and so yeah, I just think this hand plays a little bit better by 3-betting. Also, I would push out the big blind much more often, and that'll make it easier for me to win the pot heads up. But yeah, as played, just check folding on the flop. We only had an open and the straight draw on a flush draw board, which is pretty weak. Right table, not a great hand to 3-bet. I mean, it's fine, but I don't mind just calling given the price and in position. And definitely opening the cutoff on table number 1. This guy thinks about it a little bit and then checks, and we just didn't flop anything and have no equity when called. We only have one backdoor flush draw, not even backdoor straight toss. I mean, we have one with the 7-9, but I'm just gonna pretty much give it up now. His small blind opening range shouldn't be that wide, especially, I mean, only 15 hands, but he does open, you know, 7% raise first in, and he min raised the small blind versus big blind. So again, I don't know, I kind of think he will have hands, you know, higher than mine in ranking order, and just such an easy flop to see bet. Then when he checks, I think he actually has some showdown value. So we don't pick up a flush draw or anything. Again, I just decide to check. And on the ace, I guess I could bluff, but honestly, I'm not sure if he would believe it. I'm not sure if he would believe I just value bet a random ace queen on the river like that. So pretty much just gave up on this flop. And he does have a jack and turned the flush draw, so I kind of like the way he played it, trying to induce some sort of a bluff. I don't think he was folding on the flop or on the turn, maybe on the river, but honestly he might just call it down there with the jack. Thinking I'm somewhat polarized to bet the river with like an ace, maybe queen 10 I would definitely bet, but he might not believe, he might just think I'm bluffing there. So I'm fine with it. Fold on the right table, and probably going to defend on the left table with the nut flush draw and the 6-5. Decent enough. And just completely missed the flop, so just folding there. So yeah, I was actually kind of pleased the games haven't gotten that tougher. In regards to like last year or the last 2 years. Don't always, I won't always open this on the small blind, but this guy is playing pretty needy, over 344 hands, so I'm definitely opening much wider versus him. And pretty decent aces on the right table. Gonna 3-bet him from the small blind. Don't expect any fold equity pre-flop in PLO, but still want to put more money in with these decent aces. I would flat some other weaker aces like rainbow aces, and not a great flop. Honestly, he's gonna have that a lot more 6x than me, but I still have a gutter, and I just don't think I want to start out by check calling or anything else like that. I just want to take the pot down, so put out a small c-bet, and in 50 PLO, honestly, people are playing pretty straightforward, so just take it down. Again, going to c-bet on table number 1 versus the big blinds, defending pretty wide. We've got aces, we can actually get value, and we have backdoor flush draw, and importantly also we have the ace of clubs, so he is never gonna have the not flush draw here. So that just takes away a lot of the combos he's going to be check raising the flop with. Sort of a loose peel on table right, but he made it only 2.5x, and I think that's good enough for me. And on the left, we turn the nut straight, and I guess we do block the nut flush draw. But since we do have the nut straight, I don't think we have to necessarily bet it and bluff on the pot. We don't have as much to protect versus, and he will have some flushes anyway. King high flushes and 10 high flushes, etc. So I think just checking it back and checking it down is fine. So he did have bottom and middle pair on the flop. Definitely just a check calling hand. So I think he played it fine and just gave up. I don't think I mean, he's not winning by the river almost ever, but yeah, I mean, I guess he could have turned it into a bluff, but he just didn't. And on the table on the right, we do flop top pair, and we face a pretty standard c-bet. On this board texture, I think most people are going to be c-betting, you know, most of their range, especially if someone has, you know, over 200 BBs, then I'm a little bit more often going to think he's a reg. So I think his c-betting range is pretty wide here. Usually I'm just going to be check calling here. I think I actually decided to put in a check raise, if I remember correctly, because I thought about this hand, you know, a little bit more after. I'm still not sure if I like it, because I'm obviously not getting value from a worse hand. The thing is, I don't have any overcards, so I think like if I had ace king queen, I would probably just check call, because I don't mind a king or an ace coming that often, but with only cards lower than the queen, I'm not sure what I'm going to do on the turn facing a barrel. I'm not sure if I will face a barrel that often, because I will have a bunch of 7x hands here when I check call, and queens. There's not much else to have, so he might not be bluffing me that much. But when I do check raise this flop, if he doesn't have a 7 and I block the queen, he just can't continue as much, and I do make him forfeit his equity. If he has like ace king jack, he can't now hit an ace or a king to take the lead. So I kind of like it with this specific queen x hand, but I wouldn't check raise all my queen x hands for sure. And 7x I would probably just check call, honestly. But it does work out, and you know, I'm still not completely sure, but I think it's definitely fine to check raise some of those weaker queen x hands there to, you know, stop opponents from realizing their equity, and having some bluffs there as well. Pretty loose peel here on the button, but I think it's okay. It's somewhat connected, and I do have the 8s. The players behind me, I don't really know them that much, but you know, on average they're not gonna play that well. Similar spot to the first hand we played on the left table, where we just block everything. We actually even have some backdoor stuff, so we kind of have blockers to backdoor equity, and I think a raise is just gonna seem a little bit too strong when we do raise, although it doesn't really rep much except eights and some other smaller sets, but we won't have two pair that often here with 8-3, 8 deuce, 2-3. So I did think about raising for a little bit, but I decided just to flat and try to get more action than if we would raise. I think he would just fold very, very often. So he does barrel the turn, might have picked up equity, or might be just barreling with a bare overpair, like queens, kings, aces, which I think would be fine. We won't have 4 or 5 here that often, but neither will he. So actually I think this is a better spot to raise than on the flop. I think I made it a little bit too big for the board texture, but if he does have a flush draw, I don't want to give him that great odds, correct odds to call either. I think it's okay. It seems a little bit bluffy, but honestly I'm just protecting from the flush draws, and he might have some gutters or other straight draws with like a 7-9, 7-9, 10 that he might call on the turn here. But I think it's kind of good also that I won't really have that many 4-5s, so I will be bluffing here some of the time if I do have like 5s or 4s with blockers, so it puts him in a tougher spot for me to play it this way, I think. On the right, it's actually a somewhat interesting spot as well. I decide to flat pre-flop, another loose calling position, but as you can see, I think I'm just playing pretty well, and some of these guys are playing like foursome tables and just can't really focus and think about playing that well. So I think in position I am going to be able to outplay a bunch of people. Also, this guy in the small blind doesn't really 3-bet. The big blind does, but we're deepish against him as well, so it would be fine in position. So he thinks about it a bit and just checks the flop, which again leads me to think he has some showdown value, although not necessarily flush. So I don't know, I kind of like making a stab here maybe. I don't think I have that much fold equity on the flop. The other problem is I don't have any heart, so I actually don't block any flush draw. So if I did have one heart here, I think I would kind of like stabbing it here, because versus non-flush hands, we actually do have decent equity with the wrap and the bottom pair. We have a bunch of ways to improve. So yeah, I wouldn't mind taking a stab there. And I guess I did think about it on the turn, and on the river now it's not that great of a spot to stab, honestly, but yeah. So I think might have made for a decent stab on the flop. I think he would have called at least once with ace king, but we could have barreled, and we do have a bunch of ways to improve there versus ace high hands. And I think I certainly would have bet at least once if we did have like a 10 of hearts or jack of hearts blocker. So this hand doesn't make for a bad 3-bet, but this guy is short and he did pot raise, so I think I'm actually just going to defend here. And it does seem like I pulled out the hand history player to look over that my equity on that last hand. This guy just 2.5x's from the small blind. He's somewhat active, so honestly I just thought he would not have that strong of a hand, and I think I'm fine with this 3-bet. It's a pretty decent hand, and we do block aces and kings, and we're in position, and since he made it so small, we actually his 4-bet is going to be smaller as well. So yeah, I think the 3-bet is fine. Once he 4-bets, he's going to have aces pretty often, but I don't know, for some reason I just didn't believe him that much, and probably because of his stats and his 2.5x pre-flop. But in position with this pretty decent hand, I mean, we're not doing that well versus aces, but otherwise, you know, it's a pretty strong hand. I did decide to defend here. I could be convinced this is a fold, especially since we're below 100 BBs. Over 100 BBs, I think I wouldn't ever fold here. On the left, seems like I defend and the flop goes check check. I do have the queen of hearts here and top pair, so I actually think I would rather lead the turn than check. This guy probably isn't that strong of a player because he's half stacked, and even though he's, I think this is platinum, it's not that hard to get platinum if you're playing 50 PLO. So I think I should have just bet the turn or the river there and probably had decent fold equity, especially with the queen blocker. So he does check down aces and takes the pot from me, but I think I had the chance to bluff there. Maybe the 3 isn't the best card to bluff, or I would have had to bet twice, but that would be fine, I guess. Fortunately, we flopped top pair here and just gonna jam it in, repping a flush draw or whatever. He's not gonna be folding very often at all on this flop, I think. And he does have aces. No great surprise there, and we just lose both. Pretty standard. It's definitely opening this hand and 3-betting with these aces. They're not the best, but they are single suited. The 5-6 helps a bit with some wheels and some, you know, low straight flops. Oh, this guy actually folds, which is pretty good. I'll take that. On the left, I decide to c-bet, kind of on the smaller side, just trying to get him off his non-ace-x hands. I'm not sure how much I like it, honestly. There's not many cards I'm going to be able to barrel. I don't have any diamond blockers or flush draw, so I don't know. I don't like it that much. On the 3 backdoors, again, I don't think it's a good spot to barrel, as I said, so I think it's just giving up is fine after one c-bet. And especially on the flush river, I'm just not gonna try and do anything. If he doesn't have an ace, he can certainly have some flush draws there, and he did, and didn't value bet the 10 high flush, which is probably a mistake. I think he can get me to call there, or at least I'm just not gonna have a better hand than him very often at all. So I might bluff catch with like ace-8 or yeah, something like that. Maybe even like aces if he bets small enough, but I think he could bet there for sure. So easy defend versus a 3-bet in position. I think this is the same guy. So last time he played pretty passively, so I do think he has sort of a strong range to be 3-betting the small blind here. On the right table, this guy, the small blind opens. It's not that wide, so I'm obviously defending, but I don't think I have to like 3-bet or anything. I'm fine with playing this in position with deeper stacks, deeper or higher stack to pot ratio. And this guy on the left just pots, so yeah, I think I'm just gonna be jamming here. As I said, I think he has a decently strong range pre-flop. We flop 2 pair and a gutter, so I'm pretty fine with my hand, pretty happy with it. I don't really want to raise smallish, so I'd rather just get it in now. If he folds, it's not that bad, but if he stacks off with like 10 and overs or ace 10 or something like that, then it's perfect for us. And on the right, I think I thought about raising here. It's kind of similar to the Queen 7-7 rainbow, but here we do have the flush draw and we do have an over card, so I think flatting in position is just fine. Also, yeah, we're in position, so we are gonna have more flexibility post flop. This guy on the left gets hitting with spare aces and the backdoor flush draw. Pretty bad play on his part, to be honest, and he just has 30% equity. So we turn straight in the first one and just hold in the second one to win both there. This guy barrels on the right table. He might have picked up a jack, overpair, steal, overpair with a flush draw maybe. I think we could even consider again turning our hand into a bluff and raising here. Yeah, I think that would be fine actually. We could just raise, fold. It's kind of hard for him to continue with a pair overpair here. We could certainly have a boat with nines or jacks. Yeah, I think if we had a jack here, also a good spot to just raise as a bluff or semi-bluff at least. But he just barrels and then checks when we hit the flush. It's kind of hard for him to have a boat, and he does check pretty quick, so I don't think he has a boat that often. He could certainly have some worse flushes than me, with a queen high flush, 10 high flush maybe, but I'm not even sure he would call a bet with those unless we bet somewhat small. So yeah, I'm okay with checking here. We are definitely gonna have a bunch of flush draws on the flop, so I don't think we're getting that much value, and he might be just check calling with the nut flush as well. So he did have a pair overpair on the turn, and I think it would have been pretty hard for him to continue versus a raise there. So if we know he's barreling these sorts of hands, I think raising the turn there would have been kind of nice. I won't always open a single suited hand like this from early position, but yeah, I didn't recognize these guys as, you know, the regs, so I think it's fine. As I said, I do get 3-bet. I don't think I can fold pre-flop with this hand. It's actually pretty decent hand to have in our range, since much more often we will have bigger cards. So once this guy completes especially, we have to call, and on this flop there's not much we can do. Again, not always gonna open 9944, but when it's double suited I think it's totally fine. Not that great with these guys behind me, but it's okay. And standard c-bet, I think that's totally fine. We have a flush draw and, you know, some 4 set outs as well, which should be good if we only get check called. Turns a pretty bad card, and when he just pots it, there's not much we can do. I don't think these blockers, you know, are blockers in this situation. They don't really count for anything. So another hand, I think I could have just 3-bet small blind versus cutoff. I think it's good enough, double suited especially, I mean specifically. So I think I might have liked the 3-bet there. As played, I just check call with 2 backdoor flush draws. I'm only losing to the king here. He might be just stabbing with like ace jack 10 or whatever, so I think it's fine. We turn the flush draw. I mean, the 7's not particularly a great card because he can definitely have some straights here, although so could I. I guess I did think about leading myself, since it puts him in a much tougher spot with his king x hands, and we do have equity now, but not that much. So I did decide to check, and when he barrels on this card specifically, and yeah, I just don't think, although we're getting a pretty decent price, I guess we could check call once more, but it does seem like he's not going to be barreling with just one pair here, so I thought he would have maybe some straights, or maybe just some 2-pair with a open-ended straight draw, some hands like that. So I think I decided to check fold. I think check calling isn't that bad versus a bet that size, but yeah, that's a problem of playing out of position. Flop trips here. wouldn't mind leading. Yeah, I don't really want to check raise for value, but it could be like a check raise for sort of protection, since we do want to protect against a bunch of straight draws out there. You know, every card between a 6 and a king brings a straight with it, so wouldn't mind a small check raise on the flop here with trips, even though we're going to be folding versus flop 3-bet, or if he does call, we're kind of in a tough spot and we will probably check the turn most often. On the 10 river, yeah, I think checking is fine. I don't think betting is that great. Flatted the small blind with 8 jack 10, I think that's fine. Just folding the flop, I think that's fine as well. So I like this raising hand, double suited, has some low cards that will do fine in our range from middle position. We got 3-bet squeezed by this guy who, after 184 hands, only has 3-bet 2.7, which is pretty low. And especially when he's from the small blind, I think most people are even tighter with the 3-bet. So I do think, even though we're double suited, I think folding is gonna be fine. The other problem with calling, I mean, he will have aces and better ace-x hands, so we're gonna be dominated very often. The other problem is this guy calls behind us, we're gonna have bad relative position. So this guy's gonna c-bet, and then we have to decide what to do with this guy behind. And so, yeah, that puts us in a somewhat big disadvantage here. Also, this guy just might be slow playing some aces hands, or, you know, yeah, it's just not a great spot once we get 3-bet by that tight 3-better. Table on the left, this guy defends. He's probably defending super wide, so I don't mind putting in a small c-bet here in position. We're definitely gonna have more aces and strong ace-x hands than him, so I think it's fine. Once he check calls though, I mean, I don't think it's gonna have anything else than a 5 or a ace-x hand. So I don't think barreling is gonna turn out that great unless we like triple barrel him and really try to rep them aces. So I just check it back. On the river, actually, we do block the queen boat and 7 boats. So I don't know, we could actually like bluff raise here. We also have the jack of hearts, although that doesn't count as much because we wouldn't really raise flush on the river. So yeah, I think we have to just give it up or raise as a bluff, but not really repping much, honestly, since we would just barrel with aces or with queens. So yeah, I think just folding is fine. Kings here with an underguard limper. I think just flatting versus the small blind ISO is fine. This is an interesting spot because when this guy checks after ISOing pre, he's just not gonna have like aces with a flush draw or pretty much a strong flush draw or a strong hand almost ever. I think he would very often just lead or c-bet with that hand. So I think he's going to be pretty much check calling or check folding very often here. The other guy limped under the gun, and so with an overpair and a blocker to, you know, with the king of clubs to a bunch of flush draws, I think I actually like my lead here. So I lead, underguard limper folds, and this guy, it seems, the other good thing is my lead here seems pretty strong, you know, betting into 2 opponents, and I'm sandwiching this guy, putting him between me and the ISOer, so it seems a bit strong, and then this guy thinks, you know, I do bet into 2 guys. So I kind of like my lead there. I would very often check there before, but I think leading, especially with the king of clubs, is really good. So pretty deep here. I think flatting is totally fine. They're not great aces, but I don't know, I was a little bit overconfident since I had been playing well. So again, flop top set with the queen of spades as a blocker, so easy bet, and he just folds. So he probably had like medium-ish cards, I guess. Opening the decent queens into these guys. Another open. So we've gone through almost half the footage, so I'm going to cut it short. Let's just watch a couple of more interesting hands and finish it up there. If you guys enjoy this video, I have enough footage to make a part 2, so guys just let me know. Aces, another pretty weak aces. I actually think I could flat here. The thing is, he's less than 100 BBs. And opening another account, he's gonna have some ace X hands that I completely dominate as well. So I actually kind of like the 3-bet in this specific situation, but I think flatting is totally fine as well. I would definitely flat out of position with these aces. Once we hit this flop and a pair of 3, I block a bunch of 2 pairs. He will have a bunch of jack X and straight draws and whatnot, but I think just partying and committing myself to the part is fine here. I was kind of choosing my bet sizes. I guess I did c-bet a little bit smaller. I think potting it could be better. I don't want to give him a price to like check call some 9, 10 X hands, although maybe he would just check that jam those as well. But yeah, I'm not really ahead of most of his jamming range here, so if I part it, I think it just makes it a little bit easier, and I don't really want to check calls because my dry aces are not going to improve very often at all there. So if he check calls and the turn is sort of a bad card, which most of them are, I'm not going to be able to just get the money in on the turn as easily. So I think going for the extra fold equity on the flop and just pretty much forcing him to check jam or check fold more than check calling, I think that would have been a little bit better. So taking some notes here, since I'm not completely familiar with the 50 Zoom player pool. And let's see if we get into another decent spot here. This guy doesn't seem that loose, but he does seem to 3-bet a bunch. So I'm still going to be defending versus him in position with this hand. Is just strong enough. And when we hit this flop with the backdoor nut flush draw, gutter, and top pair, I don't think we can fold, especially to that sizing. It's just a little bit too small for me to fold in position. So I do call the flop. And we get into an awkward spot here on the turn where we have top pair that might or might not be good. Actually, I think we don't have that much to protect against if we're ahead now, since we do have the gutter as well, and top pair and just the 4-3 don't actually bring that many draws that he should have. So I actually don't mind checking this back in yeah, the other thought I had here, apparently when I play this hand, is that I do have the Jack of Hearts, so I will have a bunch. I do block a bunch of flop flush draws and turn flushes. And if he does have a better ace, like ace king or ace queen, or even aces, I could maybe get him to fold that hand by the river, since I mean I will have a bunch of flop flush draws and now flushes. So the SPR is kind of an awkward scenario for me, but since the flop texture is, you know, somewhat dry now that the flush came in and the 3 doesn't bring any additional draws, I think a small bet is what I would make it with my with all my flushes here that I am betting. So I did bet the small sizing. It's kind of weird because I'm obviously not value betting and I'm not protecting versus much. I'm pretty much just bluffing with top pair. So I'm not sure I like it, honestly, and I'm sure I just did it because of the Jack of Hearts here. Once the queen falls on the river, I mean all his ace queen and aces make boats, and yeah, I mean once he calls a turn, I'm pretty obviously behind, but I think this is one of the worst cards to continue bluffing. So I just decided to give it up there, and surprisingly he has a 6 high flush, and he 3-bet me small blind versus cutoff with 6-4 3-2 single suited, which is in my opinion just a pretty bad 3-bet, honestly, but it works out pretty well for him. And yeah, I'm gonna play these aces out because I don't want to leave you with those aces there. Seems like we're gonna 4-bet pre-flop, and especially good versus the under the gun 1 player, since he will have some, you know, decently strong range and hands like ace king queen jack and ace king king maybe. So we do 4-bet here, and he just jams. So probably aces, to be honest. Yep. And we're a slight favorite, 56%, so that's pretty good. And we only run it once apparently and chop it up. But yeah, I would imagine he has a bunch of hands like that. So we're right at the middle of the footage, so I don't want to make this video too long, as is usual for me. Sorry about that, but yeah, hopefully you guys like it, and let me know if you have any questions or comments or would like to see some more PLO action.